We revealed really that we have a fair to good habitat level at this point. You have already a tremendous intensity of development, both in terms of rural residential, also in terms of highway, and so you don't find the large game animals at the counts that you might in the Des Moines River Valley, for instance. We're no longer a remote valley at this location. The reservoir would certainly have a greater impact on the natural resources of that valley than any other alternative. That's obvious in terms of doing it because of the nature of water storage and what it would do and the limitations it would have to access itself. The fisheries habitat, we have one of the few smallmouth bass fisheries in this upper basin, and we lose some of this. We would convert to a river environment, to a lake environment. This particular reservoir would be around 50 feet deep with fairly steep side slopes at the dam, and so the fisheries study people have forecast a fair sport fish capability in this reservoir. However, the upstream areas are shallow, very flat, and so rough fish species would predominate in those areas. And so this composition was forecast for that particular area. With the agricultural environment we have, of course, we have a great deal of nutrients coming into such a system, and so heavy algal growth can be forecast for such a reservoir. In terms of social and economic effects, the social impact has been analyzed in quite a bit of depth. What was interesting in doing a very closely controlled survey of people, both a sampling of both in the reservoir area and on downstream, clear past Des Moines, in the upper valley, or in the valley region, as well as the adjacent upland areas. Of the people inventoried, 30% opposed construction of the reservoir and 25% were in favor. 16% were undecided and 4% had no opinion, and the remaining 25%, they were simply unaware of the project and didn't want to make any comments at all. And so there's no mandate either way when you come to this, 30% against, 25% in favor. If you move to recreational interest and move to an environmental context and then look at the people right in the reservoir area, then certainly you would move into a decided opposition flavor. And that goes without saying, I think, in most any development project. In the displacement of this, one today must look at the displacement of residences. He must allocate the cost of relocation of those people into the system. And so over 55 households would be disrupted, 170 people living in them. And so other alternatives would reduce that because you wouldn't have near the size of a project. The regional economic studies certainly showed that there were direct and indirect effects in this region. Secondary benefits would be low to modest in magnitude in terms of the development patterns. You replace agricultural losses, you might say, in that reservoir area with a recreation sector. Recreation was pretty well handled. Let's look at the agricultural role because it has two things to contribute. One, with the agricultural pattern of development we have today, we realize that the farm people apply a substantial amount of nitrogen and phosphate fertilizer to the land. And we are getting, in the last 2 or 3 years of this study, we had a very wet period, and so the drain tiles in this flat agricultural region have been flowing continuously. And we actually find that the nitrate levels in the river alone are up to where we really would not want to use this river for a water supply as a direct thing. In other words, we have measured up to 40 to 45 parts per million as nitrate nitrogen. And with the water quality standards we have, drinking water quality standards at 45, you see we've reached, and sometime we even exceeded that. In drought periods, we don't feel it be that high because the water would not be infiltrating and would not be seeping out of this agricultural soil profile to that extent. There's a tremendous amount of livestock production in this area. There are no large-scale cattle feedlots, but we do have large numbers of moderate to small size. And then we are in a large turkey growing region. So we have large turkey facilities in this area in which the summer thunderstorms can produce quite a bit of runoff. Snowmelt gives us a problem with the other feedlots. So not only does the agricultural fertilizer problem come into it from commercial fertilizers, as well as the herbicide insecticide problem, but we also have farm manures as a source of nutrient to the system. So there's no doubt that algal growth and bloom problems would be a water quality management problem in the reservoir itself. The sediment yield, this is a very flat region, and the agricultural engineer looked at the sediment potential several ways, both through regional sediment estimates and the sediment stations we have on the major rivers in this region, plus looking at it in terms of a synthetic development, looking at hydrologic patterns and estimating how much can come off the land. But the flat region that we have and the flat drainage ditches we have with the the spoil piles we have along these ditches give us really a spoil levee, and so most of the farm drainage has to pond a while before it can come into the stream. And so a lot of the sediment settles out right before it gets into the stream systems. And so with the result, we end really with a low sediment potential of around 300 tons per square mile delivered to the stream system. That amounts to about 5/10 of a ton per acre per year. And that's much below the 2 ton per acre limit being thought about in Iowa in most places, and the 5 ton per acre limit on the loess areas. So you see we're really at 1/10 of the so-called limit in some of these areas. And so the sediment storage, we would lose actually in the reservoir as proposed less than 10% of its volume of storage in 100 years from sediment deposition. Now every geologist knows that the ultimate fate of any reservoir is to fill full of sediment, but this would project out to more than a 500 to 1,000 year life for the reservoir. Now at that end of that period certainly it would be a problem. And so the reservoir sedimentation problem is a long-term thing is with us, but there's no short-term loss feature here. As Professor Baumann has pointed out, the flood damage picture depends a great deal on the economics of crop value, crop prices, as well as yields. We know the yields have gone up tremendously. In doing this particular study, the increase in yields and crop prices would indicate that the Corps of Engineers, even without the latest rapid rise in prices, could justify a 70% increase in the flood damage benefits. However, if you do introduce different flood frequency methodology as a statistical thing, then you can reduce this by a factor of 5/10. And so if you combine these, you really end up with about where the Corps of Engineers actually estimated the flood damages to be. But we were talking about $1.25, $1.40 corn. We weren't talking about $3 corn, and we're talking about $2.50 to $3 beans and not $6 beans when we did this. So the per bushel increase in price certainly means if you want to study it next year, you come up with a new answer. And all this has told us really is that perhaps resource development and resource utilization ought to go beyond the simple economic analysis we do make. There are other factors involved with it. All right, so that shows you a lot of the things that have been done. The results out of this is that the study team felt because of the economic picture, because of the resource picture, that and asked to provide an opinion that they would prefer that the reservoir project not be constructed, but that the valley site, however, go into either a green belt or a preservation concept. So far in the future, if need be, the next generation, a generation after, can take a new look at the resource development in this valley and decide then for the next generation or two what to do with it. So this idea of taking a new look every generation is going to be with us, and we feel it's part of everything we're doing. So with that, it shows you then that though that a university group can make a valuable contribution in taking all their scientific expertise and methodology, bring it into a study, and coming up with answers to solve real-world problems. And that's been the value of it. And it's been sufficient value that the study has shown that the sensitivity of this particular region to this development, the fact that perhaps with other alternatives available, they may be more costly or they may be equally costly, you can postpone this particular development pattern. And it looks to date like the state and the national government, Congress, will move along with that kind of a program. And so the Greenbelt program then does have a great deal of viability. So with that, we'll hear them.
Thank you, Dr. Dougal. I think in the interest of time, we'll just go right on. He'll be around later if you have some questions to ask. But first of all, we have a car with the lights on. It's a white Ford with a black vinyl top, 85 County, license number 28732. Okay, our final speakers for today are a team. Mark Appleson, planner for the Story County Conservation Board, and Dr. John Gordon, associate professor of forestry here at Iowa State University. And they will be talking to you on the anatomy of the Greenbelt.
I'm Gordon. Ackelson comes later. I didn't realize how timely the title of our talk was going to be. We thought as maybe a little attention getter we'd have Mark streak in, but he forgot his tennis shoes. So now I've followed in the tradition of Richard Nixon and Pierre Elliott Trudeau and Dr. Dougal and made a reference to streaking. Now, green belts. What interest did we have in a green belt before the dam? I think that's the key question so far as exposing something not about the physical anatomy of a green belt. We've seen the area in great detail, and Mark will have more detailed information on the development of the plan. But what about the cultural anatomy, and how would it have evolved, and what would the current anatomy of the green belt concept look like before the Corps of Engineers proposed a dam in the area, the one that Dr. Baumann described? Well, I don't think there would be much anatomy. In fact, I don't think there would be a green belt underway at all. And the one point I would like to make is to trace the history of why I think that's so. First of all, what are we doing with the green belt here? What is a green belt? What's it for? Well, in this case, it's simply, I think, the first thought in everyone's mind who originally was involved with it was to protect the current land use patterns and aesthetic values in the river valley that you saw in the first presentation today. It was a secondary thing, I think, to provide additional recreational opportunities for citizens. The river valley looks nice to a lot of people the way it is now. Now, it's not optimally useful, and Dr. Dougal mentioned this. There are a lot of no trespassing signs, and there are a lot of management modes going on that we probably, at least some of us, like to perpetuate. But to protect the resource was the main thing. And maybe if we had the moral outlook on everyone's part that Mr. Leopold spoke of in the first presentation, it wouldn't be necessary to do anything at all about maintaining a green belt. Nevertheless, it seems to be. Apparently, moral suasion works better if there's some sort of outside threat connected to it. Let me just trace the history of this green belt development briefly, and then you can go to Mark for more specific information. 1969, it was proposed by the County Conservation Board executive officer in his recreation planning document that a green belt be installed in precisely the area in which one is now being installed. Was there a lot of interest? Was there a lot of public support? No, there was not. And one reason that was given for this, and I don't know whether it was real or imagined at the time, was that there would be a great deal of landowner opposition in the river valley, and they would prevent the acquisition of public land in the river valley that would be necessary to create a green belt. So there didn't seem to me to be a great deal of interest or support at that time. Now, soon after this was proposed, the dam, which has, I guess, been perennially a factor in the river valley's cultural history, came back again. And this caused a lot of excitement, people for it, people against it. But in this case, there was a focal point of the activity, and that was the environmental study that was done by Iowa State University, directed by Dr. Dougal and others, and that he just spoke to you of. This tended to do two things. First of all, it assembled a vast mass of physical data about the proposed area for the green belt that really had never been put together before for any other area in the state of Iowa, and I don't think many areas anywhere. So that it was possible to make rational decisions and plans about what to do with a given area, quite independent of the dam. This assemblage of information would have been useful if the dam had not even been suggested, but it wouldn't have happened if the dam hadn't been suggested. Similarly, it created a great deal of environmental awareness in the community about what was going on in the river valley and what resource existed there. I certainly wasn't as aware of the Skunk River Valley between Ames and Story City as a resource before the environmental study. I think this was true of many people. There's another component. Not only did they provide data, the environmental study provided data, not only did they provide an initial greenbelt plan, they provided a focal point for people to crystallize their opinion around. Maybe they liked the dam less than the green belt. Maybe the people in the river valley liked a dam less than a green belt. In some cases, I think this was instrumental in changing the opinions of particular landowners as to whether or not they'd like to see their land included in some public project at all. And maybe if it appeared to them that there was a choice between seeing it above water as opposed to underwater, they would pick the above water, that is, say, the green belt. Now, one more point. The initial green belt plan, as included in Alternative 4A that Dr. Dougal presented, will probably never be realized in all its detail. I don't think that's bad, and I don't think it's any reason to say that the formulation of it was not valuable. Without that plan, there would have been nothing to start with to help to coalesce public opinion around and to present to people the concept of a green belt in this particular area. Now, just to summarize, no interest before the dam was proposed again. Crystallization of interest by the data gathering with the environmental study and the actual provision of a green belt plan, swing in public opinion, perhaps due to the threat of a dam, and now finally, rapid implementation of a green belt project. And Mark Ackelson's going to tell you about that right now. Mark.
Thank you, Dr. Gordon. Well, I'm going to address myself primarily to two main topics. Time is running pretty short here. First, I want to give you a rough idea of where we're at presently with the development, show you some of the concepts that have evolved, and then I think more important to the plan itself, at this stage anyway, is what has happened as a result of citizen involvement. And Dr. Gordon just touched on this. I want to touch on some things of why this involvement is necessary for the citizens, ways of involving the citizens, and then, again, why this is important to, in this case, the Story County Conservation Board as a public agency. So, Steve, could you flip on that projector, please? Again, a quick look at the area. I think for our purposes, the county is defining the Greenbelt more or less as a recreation preservation corridor that includes both farm and parkland and is designed to prevent undesirable encroachments. And now these encroachments might be physical or visual. A quick overview of the area again that you hadn't seen before. I think this slide points up a little of the uniqueness of it. It's been mentioned that only 25% of the forest cover is in this particular area, and approximately 1% of the whole county has timber. So you can see the value of the resource there. There again, okay. I'll touch on some of the concepts as they are evolving now, and I might stress they are still evolving through this idea of citizen input. One of the approaches, of course, the original approach included 1,415 acres here that would be in public ownership. Since that time, we've reevaluated this proposal and come up with a figure of approximately 300 or 400 acres that would be in public ownership, and the additional lands being in scenic easements or such. In this general map here, we can see the basic concept of having nodal areas. We call this a nodal development, and that there would only be certain access points along the corridor. This has many advantages. We lose many of the management problems that are involved. We are able to preserve the area much better, not only the area itself, but the experience of the user in the area. So we have these basic nodes of development. The Sleepy Hollow Rest Area, McFarland Park, Soper's Mill, those are, we're happy to announce, are becoming united. And the Anderson H-Tree access, and then the Story City Park system. I think this is a good example also of a planning process that if you let the land dictate your moves, it'll do just that, and you don't have to force it. One of the ideas is a trail system. The trail system here from Soper's Mill, traced by this dash line here, is in. Some of it we don't like to be in. It's motorcycle damage primarily. But from there we go north on the abandoned county road up to Anderson H Tree, and then from there north there's remnants of an old stagecoach trail that ran from Fort Dodge to Fort Des Moines. And so you can see we're almost there. We've got the bulk of it there anyway. Some of the land is presently in public ownership. It was owned by the Bureau of Public Roads first when the interstate was going to cut straight through, and then this land was deeded over to the Corps of Engineers. This roughly shows where this land is at. There have been some changes in that when we got more data. So that starts to show you how the whole thing is starting to piece together. Okay, and now just go back one. Wait. So I think that's really a fast, superficial view of what's happening there. But I think I wanted to get to the point of the citizen involvement. That's by far, we feel, the most important aspect of this whole project. I think I might start with a little quote from, if you've never seen this little booklet, it's called Take Part. It's by Lawrence Halpern and Associates, a landscape architecture firm out of California. And anyone who's interested in developing citizen input programs was certainly gain from looking briefly at this. And I think he touches on the key points. He says people need to become aware of their environment as it really is and to experience it. And of course, this is what we've been doing. We've been trying to get people into this area to really experience the area. And the whole idea is to respond to needs. Needs of the people, and not some dictated foregone conclusion that is often the public agency gives to the people and said, this is it, this is the way it's going to be. Along that same line, the public agencies, especially when we get down on the real local level where you're dealing with people one-to-one, you have to show a sincere desire. I mean, I stress sincere. Sincerity in seeking this public involvement. And if you lack this sincerity, believe me, they're going to look right through you awful fast. And from then on, it's really uphill. You lose the respect of the public, there's distrust, and so forth. I think we're see more than we'd like to see that now. So it boils down to the fact that an agency must establish its credibility over the long run. Just because one project is finished, that's not the end of it. So we've got to establish this credibility over the long run. And briefly, some of the ways that we are approaching the citizen involvement. There are many, many techniques, and some new ones that we hope to be initiated in the near future. But I think one of the first initial ones was field trips, and I mentioned getting the people into the environment, making them aware of what's going on. And this started quite some time ago. And this has been part of the basic philosophy behind our whole development and involvement programs, is getting the people into the environment to experience it. One of the other approaches is we act kind of as a minstrel show and spend 2 or 3 nights a week on the road giving slide programs and talks. Dr. Gordon kind of hinted at the real strong influences in this whole project has been the landowners themselves. Way back when, people were a little bit scared that this greenbelt would never come about because the landowners would fight it the whole way. Well, I guess that they finally resolved themselves to the fact that it's better to have their land above water than underwater, and that may be why. But we've spent a great deal of time at landowner meetings, and we're very excited and enthusiastic about what's been happening at these meetings. We're getting overwhelming support, support which we never thought would come about, and I think it all come from this citizen involvement thing. Another approach we've taken is the open hearing. this is very good. It helps get a lot of ideas from the public, especially if you have smaller hearings where people are a little more willing to talk. And of course, some of our local groups here have sponsored hearings for us to participate in, which has helped greatly. I mentioned we do talk to not only civic groups, but church groups and organizations, you know, from tots all the way to the old agers. So we're trying to incorporate everybody. And of course, we use the media quite heavily, especially papers and radio, TV a little bit, but not as much. And I think through all this procedure of getting input, one of the facets that's often overlooked is the documentation of this communication. It's pretty easy to kind of gear your own mind up and come to your own conclusions. And as a public agency, you shouldn't do that, of course. We're trying to meet public needs. And so we try to document as well as we can all the communications, not only written but oral, and our meetings and so forth, so that we can look back and have a good idea of exactly what has taken place. And I think from that, why is the citizen input important to the public agency? Well, I've touched on some aspects of it. But I guess the most obvious is that a public agency is spending the public tax dollar. And we feel, anyway, that because we're doing that, we should be able to account for ourselves at all times. We should be able to account for where this money is going and how it's being spent. As a public agency, we're serving public needs. And you know, we can't understand how any agency can be serving public needs if they're not getting public input. A lot of times it's done very, very superficially, and I think the end product is not what it could be or should be. Now, I don't want to give you the impression that we go out, seek everyone's needs, inputs, bring them in, put them down on paper, and say that's the way it's going to be. I think, as professionals in every field, one of our real problems, one of our real responsibilities is providing the technical guidance to these inputs so that things are done properly. I think we can see urban sprawl as an example, a lot of other things, especially in this area. We could very easily completely destroy the resource that we have, even with the Greenbelt. It could be quite easily done. So we have to temper all these needs with technical knowledge. Some of the other aspects, as far as they relate to the agency, of course, this input helps us to more define our goals, and a lot of times it helps us when we get a little foggy in the head to clarify these goals. And at the same time, it provides for a continuous review of where we've been and where we're going, and it helps us to determine shifts in public opinion and public needs and so forth, which seems to be transpiring rather rapidly. And probably one of the major points is if you're sincere, it provides a fantastic working atmosphere with the people. And I think without this atmosphere, there is very little hope of initiating some of these projects. And I guess I didn't touch on it earlier, I should have. Part of the planning process, it's pretty easy to come up with a plan. And a lot of agencies see the plan as the final goal, that's it. And we believe that's completely wrong, and I think everyone else will. The implementation is the goal you're seeking and not the plan itself. In our own office, we have volumes and volumes of plans that are sitting on our shelf with no way of implementing them. So they do anyone little good. At the same time, the citizen involvement gives us as an agency a chance to make the citizens aware of current legislation that's pending, so we can again seek their involvement, also hopefully to get them maybe to support some legislation that may be of critical concern. And I think the whole thing is an education process, not only for us but for the people, we can make them very aware of resource problems in general. And I think this project, especially the awareness portion of it, has caused the people to kind of uprise and want to preserve this area. Now I've got some slides of the area in much more detail than was previously shown, and it kind of centers around the greenbelt. We can run through them real fast if we got time. We feel this particular parking lot, if you remember, was a massive thing. It was about 1,000 feet long and 80 feet wide, kind of like a scaled down North Grand Plaza parking lot. And we felt that parking can become very important. It can set your whole tone to what's going to happen in the park, how it should be. So we've broken up the parking lot with the use of earthen berms and ornamental fencing and so forth. Of course, every time we look at that, we see that big weed in the front. When we got real deep into the idea of a interpretive type facility, our board thought it would be a wise idea for us to visit other centers, and I think this was a very wise decision indeed. We've learned a lot from their mistakes, and hopefully we won't make the same ones, and we've learned a few shortcuts. This is one of the centers we visited in Wood Lake, in Richland, Minnesota. Gives an idea of how they're trying to blend some of their facilities into the environment. Two of our county-owned areas, McFarland Park and Stoker's Mill. Of course, when you start talking interpretive centers, the first real problem is getting past the philosophical stage. How deep do you want to get into it? In other words, we could supply a run-of-the-mill, everything behind glass type museum, and we don't think that's the approach. And we come to this conclusion mainly from citizen involvement and the staff. We feel that the place to learn is in the environment and not in a room. Many of the facilities that would be incorporated into the Greenbelt type plan are already existing through very good forethought by some of those who have come before us. Some of our new land acquisitions to the north, I alluded to, quite a diversity of plant species especially. It's used quite extensively right now by Project ECO, which is environmental curriculum opportunity for those states who don't have it. It's a fantastic program to get especially elementary kids out into the environment. It's a real learning experience for them. And we're also talking about the possibility of including handicap facilities within an interpretive facility. This particular one was at Wood Lake, a blind trail. And I think it pointed up something else too, that these facilities wouldn't and shouldn't only be used by blind people. There's a real extra sensory thing when you put the blindfolds on. You sure feel and sense a lot more. Some of the details, one of the things we found out when we were at this particular facility, we assumed most blind people read Braille. False, only about 15% do. Rather unique idea. You don't think much about. A blind person can't see a bird's nest. What's a bird's nest like? How do you convey this sense to a blind person? Some of our own interpretive facilities that are just starting, having real problems presently with vandalism. Some more details of an overall plan that have to be worked out very carefully, that have a strong influence on the environment, signing and so forth. Prairie areas have been delineated and are being researched further in the Greenbelt. The FFA chapter of the Story City School has agreed to plow and seed a particular area for us in the Greenbelt. Also, we have delineated several virgin pothole prairies that are outstanding wildlife habitat that would be included. Some of the species we would have, Liastris, blazing star. Run through these pretty quick. Some of course view these as problems. They have their own unique beauty and their own unique place in the environment. back down a little more to the river valley, some of the species that are there. And this is, this is really a quick glance. Bellwort, same bellwort. Walking sticks. Common garden spiders. I gotta watch what I say, I'm not an entomologist. Of course, fungi. I think you've seen that picture before. That's our same possum, chewing up the same pencil it did before. Raccoon. We have a very accurate list of species that are in this area that came out of the impact statement, and from this we're able to identify habitat quite well also. Milk snakes, common resident but not very well seen, often seen. Touch-me-not. And the river, of course, the character of the river itself we've seen previously is very much a meandering river. These present a lot of problems once we get calls several times a year coming to blow out a beaver dam. Some species that we have to be very, very careful of when we think of an overall greenbelt plan. Many of these species cannot tolerate human encroachment, and so we're looking very carefully at areas to be set aside for these species. American egret and the blue heron. There's a lot of interesting history along the valley. Was mentioned earlier about the 50-some archaeological sites. This happens to be an old bridge abutment from one of the defunct county road systems. This brings us up to where Kegley Creek comes into the Skunk. Quite a beautiful area. I am presently negotiating with this landowner to try to work out some kind of arrangement so that this area can be used. The Soper's Mill area. Boy, I wish I had a slide. Steve and I were just flying yesterday, and it almost makes you sick what this site looks like now from the air. It's being virtually destroyed. You see the old bowstring bridge off to the right, and here, the county road system. This is the old county road system. This is some old pioneer settlements and so forth, and of course on north. The bowstring bridge. I hadn't realized the price of steel was quite as high as it was, but evidently it's.
What's happening out there? Someone said they were cutting it out.
You know, it's about half these rails you see in this picture are gone. It's steel must be awful high. They're bringing torches out, hacksaws, and the whole bit. So it's slowly being disassembled. That's on Corps of Engineer land primarily right now. I think this dates that bridge somewhat. There's a plaque on there. I think it says something around 1900. But you can see, this is a picture of Soper's Mill when it was still standing. This picture was taken somewhere in the 1890s, and the bridge is in the background. That dam is presently under the county bridge. The ripples, supposedly, that you see underneath that bridge are the remnants of that dam. And portions of that mill have been moved up the hill and are now part of a barn. Soper's Mill area is used quite extensively now. Some of the use is a little more passive than others. I guess this starts to lead us into some of the problems we're having in this particular area, and I'm real happy to report at this time that it looks like we're going to be able to enter into an option to buy this particular portion of land. This sign was up about 2 days. I guess we're going to probably redesign our signs, make them black and white target structures. This, I alluded to, I mentioned the trail system that's there, that's created by motorcycles and pedestrian use, or users. This is the beginning of it. Doesn't seem to have too much impact there. Of course, the Soper's Mill area, for those of you who haven't been up there yet, I think you'll enjoy it. Quite beautiful. This particular picture was taken in May in 1972. And started to show us the problems that were occurring there with this, with the reservoir hanging over our heads, with this land being part of it in management by the Corps, part of it being owned by private citizens. There wasn't much that could happen. This picture was taken in, I think, about August. You can see the difference in damage. Not much there anymore. kind of a hint at where they're going in. Okay, and it was mentioned it is posted no hunting or trespassing, and one of the real problems with the damage is that the landowners live so far away that there's no way that they can control the damage occurring there. I thought possibly I'd gotten my vengeance after almost being run over by two, and then I found this one. Pointed out another problem, stolen motorcycles being dumped. And I don't want to leave you with the impression that everyone that's using the area is completely destroying it. We have a lot of, especially college groups that go out there. It's quite a good place to have a kegger, actually. And when there is enough water, the Skunk River has its very own whitewater. But was mentioned earlier, there isn't. This doesn't happen a great deal of time. Where Bear Creek comes in, and then I mentioned down the county road to the Anderson H Tree area, and there to the north. I think we need to stop there, Steve. We're running real late. From the north there, this is the canoe access area. The famous H tree before it caught Dutch elm. That's a red elm and an American elm grafted together. This particular access area. And then I think we can stop with this one, Steve. But I wanted to get to the remnants of the old Stagecoach Trail going north. It had been used one time as a county road and had been vacated back to the landowners. And it looks like we're going to also be able to use this. So I guess some of the other, where are we presently? We're still seeking public involvement, input. We're also doing, of course, continuing with our planning, and we're also working very closely with the Land Use Analysis Laboratory, some of the fellows you met earlier, in analyzing this land for compatibility of different type recreation uses, because one of the main thrusts of the whole thing is preservation, and we think that a wise use is definitely necessary. So that was a quick overrun. So if you've got any questions, we'll be around afterwards, and I think we can mention them.
What luck have you had with the landowners in terms of beginning to negotiate easements or controlled development type of contracts or something?
Yeah, we've bought our first parcel as of about 2 weeks ago. We have an option. It looks like an agreement to take an option right now on the area around Soper's Mill. It's being extensively damaged. Presently, we've met or contacted every landowner within the valley, and at present time, it looks like we may have 2 holdouts. And so everyone else is going on quite well. It's very kind of heartwarming to see that everyone's kind of pulling together on this project, and they are quite well.
Thank you, Dr. Gordon, Mr. Epson. I'm sorry we run so late this morning, but we did get started a little late to begin with. This does conclude our morning session, and you'll have an hour and a half for lunch. Our afternoon sessions will start at 1:30 at Carver Hall. It's some distance to the southwest from here. It's just south of our administration building and just north of Lake Laverne. The rooms will be room 1 and 101, located in the ground and first floor. The fishery session will be in room 1. The wildlife session will be in room 101. Reminder to those who have not finished registration yet, please do so now. This also holds for our faculty members. We need more people on the banquets and field trips in order to break even, particularly on the Skunk River trip. I think you would enjoy it. You've seen an overview of the whole valley this morning. For those from out of town, we suggest that you eat lunch at the Iowa State Memorial Union. It's at the very south part of campus, next to the parking ramp. The meals there are inexpensive and very well prepared. Also a reminder, we have an open house and displays. We have the J.N. Darling cartoons, Iowa State Press display, the Wildlife Society, and graduate schools display over in the Science Edition to the west of here. The displays will be open from 11:30 to 1:30 today and all day tomorrow. The Fisheries and Wildlife faculty will be available to discuss graduate programs and anything else we'd like to discuss with them during these times also. On Sunday, there is a student paper session held in the Pioneer Room of the Iowa State Memorial Union, starting at 9:30 and continuing through the day. See your abstracts for any more information. Thank you.